Welcome to Squire Patton Boggs. I understand this is your second day of Semana Dominicana. We're very happy to be with you today and host. I'm going to be joined by a couple of my colleagues. It's certainly one at least, Karen Street, who's going to answer some of the tougher questions. So let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Everett Eisenstadt. I'm a partner with Squire Patton Boggs. I have been with the firm almost 3 years now. I've got a deep affinity for the Dominican Republic. It's one of the trade agreements that I cut my teeth on many years ago when I worked on Capitol Hill as the Chief International Trade Counsel for the Senate Finance Committee. I was part of the team that authorized the legislation to allow the president to negotiate trade agreements. That was a very quaint and different period of trade policy than what we have today. But I also then went over to the U.S. Trade Representative's office, where I was the Assistant USTR for the Americas, and I worked on the entry into force of the trade agreement. And I remember fighting over rice and chickens and sugar, and we're still fighting over those things. So they're still important. And then moved back to the Senate Finance Committee and worked on some other trade agreements. Worked for General Motors for 3 years and worked at the White House most recently before coming here. Actually, I worked at General Motors, went to the White House, then worked for General Motors. But I've been part of the Some of the Americas, which I know is a big event that's coming up this year, so we'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm really honored to be here. I'm joined by my colleague, Karen Street, who I'll please ask to introduce yourself and give a little background on your...
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Street. I am a principal in the public policy practice group here at Squire Patton Boggs. I've been with the firm for about 4.5 years, and before joining, I was on Capitol Hill for about 14. I started out my career on the Senate side. My first boss was actually a Republican from Georgia, Johnny Isaacson, may he rest in peace. And after working with him for a brief amount of time, I moved over to work with Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, which made for a very awkward exit interview. But I had the pleasure of working with him for almost 10 years, really kind of grew up in his office working on business and economic development issues. And then when he retired, I did go to the House side to get a different flavor of Congress. I worked for the Congressional Black Caucus for about 4 years. First as policy director for Cedric Richmond when he was chair of the caucus. And then I became Karen Bass's chief of staff, now mayor of Los Angeles, and became her executive director of the caucus when she was chair. So Karen Bass, coming from LA, has a great affinity for kind of the Black Latino collaboration and coordination. So we were very intentional in our work with CBC and partnering with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus as well. So it is wonderful to be here with you all.
And since we're in Washington, we're going to talk about policy and politics. And this is going to be a little broader, not just trade. We're going to cover some of the other trends that are happening right now. And I'll just say that we've had the second Trump administration now for about 9 months, and the change has been dramatic and very the truth that comes out, and we'll learn some more. But there's a lot to cover. So let me run through this is the run of show here. First, I just want to reiterate how happy we are that you're here. We've been hosting the group for, I think 15 years or so. It's been many, many years. We're really pleased that we're part of your program. We've seen the agenda. You've got a lot going on this week. We're honored that you spent time with us, so thank you for being here. What I'm going to cover is trends in Latin America. They're going to be broad. We don't have time to go into everything. We're going to focus specifically on trade trends, and I've got a couple of issues I want to highlight for you because I think they're especially relevant to the economic well-being of the Dominican Republic. Some of the implications for these trends, and then we're going to pivot toward politics. We'll have an open Q&A with Karen, myself, Rodney Slater, and anyone else who happens to be in the room. Rodney just joined us, former Secretary of Transportation under President Clinton, and a wonderful colleague. So let's go, without further ado, we'll start with one of our favorite trends, crime. What's going on? So President Trump came into office and he was laser focused on trying to eradicate and eliminate drug trafficking. He's made fighting crime, particularly narco trafficking, one of his highest priorities. January 20th, the very first day he became re-elected and took the second term of his presidency, he designated a number of cartels and organizations as foreign terrorist organizations. This enables him to use additional powers to go after them. As you'll see there, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who now holds 3 different jobs, including Secretary of State, he's also a National Security Advisor, was quoted saying, "We will use the full might of the United States to take down and eradicate these drug cartels." Just to give you a sense of some of the actions that have been taken, and again, much of this is unprecedented. We can talk about its implications, but of course, there's been a number of strikes on Venezuelan boats in the Caribbean with alleged trafficking narcotics for narco traffickers. He also has decertified or expected to decertify Colombia's failing demonstrably to curb drug trafficking, which, if any of you recall, the decertification process, it can lead to sanctions. So we'll have to watch that very carefully. Obviously, the situation in the relationship between Colombia and the United States is not what it was at one point in time, and this will obviously have additional impacts. Gunboat diplomacy, I mean, we actually have ships and nuclear submarines in the Caribbean right now, so it's something that we're going to be watching very closely. There's an increased military presence in the Southern Caribbean, 7 warships carrying 4,500 sailors. So I don't know if they're there on a training exercise. I don't have privy to that information, but it's certainly something relevant for the region. And then, of course, not surprisingly, he used tariffs initially in the first few months of his term, almost within a month, to impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada and China for fentanyl trafficking. So clearly, focusing on crime, especially narco trafficking, is a very high priority for the president and his team. Let's take a quick look at foreign policy and how it affects the region. You would not be surprised to learn that the U.S. government is concerned about Chinese influence in the region. There was quite a bit of a discussion about ownership of the Panama Canal, which is now was owned by Hong Kong-based companies who have been pressured to sell to U.S.-based companies. That is still evolving, but there is a concern about Chinese influence in the region, and I think it's going to implicate a lot of the developments over the next 3 years. We have also seen tariffs used for other foreign policy purposes, as you may know, and I'm sure you do. There's a 50% tariff imposed on Brazil for a number of reasons, unfair trading practices, but also due to political factors, including the treatment of former Brazilian President Bolsonaro. We may be seeing a little bit of a thaw in that relationship. I know that at the UN meeting, President Trump and President Lula agreed to meet, so that's a good sign, and we'll have to watch that and see how it unfolds. And there's a bill called when I was at the Senate as well, it's called the Global Magnitsky Act. It's a bill that enables the U.S. government to sanction individuals, remove visas, and impose sanctions, and he has used it quite a bit. He has imposed sanctions on the wife of the Brazilian judge who presided over the criminal case of former President Bolsonaro and a number of other Brazilian officials. So again, this just demonstrates the president is not going to shy away from using every tool to achieve his foreign policy objectives. Next slide will be immigration. No action there. Border security and enforcement, super high priority in the first administration and has been a very high priority as well. As noted, he's really going after Mexican border cartels. We talked about the foreign terrorist organization designation. He has also signed into laws that allow non-citizens to be detained if charged with or arrested for or admit to certain crimes. The legal immigration restrictions are being heightened. There is now a $100,000 fee for an H-1B visa applicant that was rolled out in kind of a clunky way, causing a lot of problems. We can talk about that. Most refugee admission programs have been suspended. I suspect this affects the region, especially Haiti, which continues to have enormous stress on its citizens. And then administrative changes, including challenging U.S. birth citizenship and pursuing efforts to eliminate birthright citizenship. And we now have ICE as the largest federal law enforcement agency in the country. And again, a lot of this is unprecedented. It has deep implications, and it's still pretty early in the term. So moving on to something simple, trade. It's now coming with extra tariffs. You don't have to pay any more. You get them for free. The foundation of President Trump's agenda really has been put in place now. We think we've seen the patterns are set. The president had three main goals when he took office. They were in his America First trade agenda policy proposals that was articulated on January 20th, reshoring manufacturing, raising revenue for the U.S. government, and combating unfair trading practices. He's doing this, and he's doing it. You can argue whether he's doing it well or not, but he's definitely achieving a lot of these objectives that he set out. There's now a 10% universal tariff upon most governments, most countries, including the Dominican Republic. That is actually one of the lower tariff rates. There's some very high rates around the world. He has also used, and just to be clear, those are reciprocal tariff rates, country specific. There's also a number of investigations on sectors which are global. There's two that I'm going to talk about, and I think we should talk about specifically, which is semiconductors and medical devices. But these are being used to investigate whether imports of a particular product pose a national security concern to the United States. The best example to kind of conceptualize this is steel. Steel and aluminum were the first tariffs imposed under the Trump administration on sectors. The idea is that we needed X amount of capacity, 85, 90%, I think, can't remember the exact number, of capacity to produce domestically, or our national security would not be protected. So if you take that concept, he's trying to focus on sectors that he deems are critical. There's many sectoral investigations ongoing. Some of these have already resulted in tariffs, obviously 50% on steel and aluminum. There's tariffs on autos, auto parts, recently announced tariffs on timber, upholstered furniture, which I did not know was a national security concern, but it is, and many others. So that's a definite trend, and I think we'll see more and more of that. And then, of course, he's used a lot of the tariff, including the threats of tariffs, to negotiate new bilateral trade frameworks. And I really think that's something we should discuss as well, the implications for the Dominican Republic. So, reciprocal tariffs announced July 31st. It may seem like January to me, but it's been a lot of activity. Set country-specific rates ranging from 10% to 41% for 69 trading partners. A 10% baseline for just across the board. These are being used to get progress on unfair trading practices, elimination of non-tariff barriers. As mentioned, the rate for the Dominican Republic was set at 10%. That obviously is in contravention of the CAFTA DR. And there's a lot of interplay between the sector-specific tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs, and it is incredibly complicated to figure out what your tariff rate's going to be on an import into the United States. It's going to be something that will take some sorting out for quite some time. But he has used the threat of these tariffs to go to the negotiating table. This is completely different than when we did the CAFTA DR negotiations and many other trade agreements where Congress was intimately involved, authorized the president, gave him direction, put constraints upon the executive branch. These tariffs are being imposed primarily by statutes that have been dormant for many years, including one that we'll talk more about, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, but also, as we mentioned, the 232 sectoral, and also we are seeing some 301 tariffs coming, I believe, in the near future. So initially, a lot of countries resisted negotiating. They said, we're not going to do it. I'll just give you an example. The European Union, after the president negotiated an agreement with the United Kingdom that was, I think it came in at about 10%, had some reduced rates for steel and aluminum autos, including a quota, and the European Union's like, oh, that's a worst deal. We're never going to do a deal like that. You know, the UK is just really sold out. They contravened the WTO. This is terrible. Well, look what happened 3 months later. They negotiated almost exactly the same kind of agreement. So there's many of these ongoing. There's now agreements, we're calling them framework agreements, not final agreements. We can talk about the difference between a framework and a final agreement and why it matters. But since April 2nd, there's been a number of trade deals announced, including with the United Kingdom, European Union, Japan, South Korea. We'll see. There was announced. There's some of the others that have been announced that are not quite been implemented, and some that have moved along quite aggressively. So what do these frameworks look like? And the reason I want to bring this to your attention is because I am pretty convinced that the administration is going to seek a framework agreement to build on top of or in addition to the current agreement. So you should pay attention to this next slide. What do these framework agreements look like? Well, there's generally commitments to invest in the United States. We saw with both Europe, not both, but Europe, South Korea, Japan, massive amounts of investment committed to the United States. That is still ongoing, but that has been a central part of these framework agreements. There's also been some elimination of non-tariff barriers and tariff on U.S. exports to those countries, particularly on priority industries. So a little bit of foreign market liberalization to increase U.S. exports. The United States says, okay, in exchange for this, I'll give you a decent tariff rate. I won't go to zero, but I'll give you a decent tariff rate, and we will give you a break. And this is super important, so pay attention. We'll give you a break on the sectoral rates. So, for example, on autos, very important to South Korea. So they negotiated a 15% sectoral rate. That's still super high, 15%, but it's better than 25%. And it enables them to maintain a competitive advantage. So the reason I'm raising this is because I want to talk to you all, either now or later, about these pending sectoral investigations on semiconductors and medical equipment, because they may interplay with CAFTA-DR, and there's a lot of complexity there that needs to be discussed and prepared for. There's also purchase commitments where the governments will say, okay, we'll buy U.S. military goods, we'll buy, natural gas, U.S. exports, could be aircraft, energy, agriculture, commodities. So those are the basic constructs of frameworks. In addition, and the reason I'm raising this next slide is because the USMCA, US-Mexico-Canada agreement is going to be the laboratory for potential modifications to other trade agreements in the region, including CAFTA-DR or DR-CAFTA. There is a deep concern, and has been for quite some time, by Republicans and Democrats that China was investing into Mexico and using the Chinese Free Trade Agreement as a platform to export Chinese products to the United States, that they weren't really products of Mexico. So there is going to be a renegotiation of that agreement. I've heard directly from USTR that it is going to be a structural renegotiation, so that's quite impactful. We believe with great confidence that the rules of origin will be changed, meaning that what qualifies for preferential treatment will be made more restrictive. It could even have a U.S. content requirement. It could have a new requirement, such as a foreign entity. If a foreign entity has a major 50%, then they wouldn't be able to claim preference. So it could have a foreign entity ownership element to it, but it's something I would watch very, very closely. A friend of mine, whom you probably know, wrote an article yesterday about this and what it meant for Asian economies. I would strike Asian, I'd say all economies that have an FTA, because this is going to be the new model. So just to run through the time frame, deadline for written comments, if you have any comments, are due November 3rd. There will be a public hearing on the 17th. We expect a report to Congress around January, and then the review will begin. We can go into detail about what happens with the review. We don't need to do that right now. But again, I want to just note why this matters for CAFTA-DR. I believe that this USMCA will be a model for what kind of changes the U.S. government may ask in other trade agreements. So I feel like I hate doing trade now. People get so depressed. It's just sad. But, hopefully with challenges come opportunities. We'll see. So looking ahead, Summit of the Americas obviously is a very great opportunity for the Dominican Republic to highlight what has been an incredible growth story, an incredible story on democracy, and really partnership with the United States. And I personally feel like the relationship is on very good footing. This is a good opportunity to get business invested as they already are, but bring in additional investment, additional opportunities. We know that Secretary Rubio is very interested in the region, that he's been very supportive of the relationship. Come to fruition by the end of this year. Probably no real term effects until later next year. But it is very, very important to watch, because if these IEEPA tariffs fail and you've been paying them, or one of your counterparts has been paying these tariffs, in theory, they should be able to get the money back. So that may be a big deal. We have also seen another trend. We've seen very, very little retaliation from other countries. Canada retaliated a little bit, China retaliated, Europe threatened retaliation. We don't know if that will last, but this concern over a massive trade war has not come to fruition yet, but we'll have to see how that evolves. And then the framework agreement implementation is ongoing, both with countries that already have framework agreements, but also with those that may have framework agreements. So that's going to give us more insights into the general direction of U.S. trade policy. So what are we likely to see in the future? Well, increased complexity of supply chains, no question about it. And it's not just tariffs, it's also investment. CFIUS rules, export controls, labor, UFLPA, which is the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, but forced labor and other matters will be important as well. And I expect to see in the USMCA there may be additional labor and environment provisions included. So increased complexity, definitely. And I think it's a real problem for a lot of companies, because customs and supply chain used to kind of be a back office problem. And now I was talking with some CEOs, this literally is rising to CEO level, where CEOs are directly involved because the bottom line is implicated so bad and it's so expensive that it's part of the major part of running a business these days. Increased use of transactional diplomacy. What I'm talking about there is sure, we'll do this for you, but we want something in return. Are you going to buy our gas? Are you going to buy our corn? That kind of transactional diplomacy. Will you invest in the United States? We expect that to continue. Reduced or redirected foreign aid and economic assistance, that's ongoing. It's going to continue to transpire. We do expect to see increased strategic economic engagement where interests align. This is a slower moving process, but if you look at the terms of, say, the EU-US framework agreement, there's nearshoring elements in there. They're not called nearshoring, but you can find them. And so I think that's an important concept to take into account when looking at our relationship with the Dominican Republic. There's likely to be greater security and narcotics enforcement in the region, including with increased military and law enforcement involvement. And of course, stricter immigration enforcement is going to continue to be a trend. So we will see most of this is going to continue to transpire over the next several years, and it's going to be space we'll want to watch carefully. So what does this mean for you? Well, as I said, the 10% violates the CAFTA-DR. That may decrease U.S. demand for Dominican exports or cause companies to think about, well, should I go ahead and move back to the United States? I don't see a lot of that, but if the tariffs go up much higher, or the Dominican Republic loses its competitive advantage, say, the 10% relative to a 20% is still an advantage, but we'll have to see how other economies land. Higher tariffs make some of your competitors may actually make the Dominican Republic more attractive if it's able to maintain that 10% tariff. And then, of course, there's also a discussion of rare earth metals and interest in some of the manufacturing on semiconductors, medical devices, and defense technology. We are definitely going to see greater security and narcotics enforcement, but there's been a lot of collaboration and cooperation there, and we expect that to continue to be a high priority for the administration. So the next slide is a little sensitive. What does this mean? How do you work in the new administration? First, everything's negotiable. Okay, it used to be a boundary like, well, we won't talk about that in the context of a trade agreement. Well, that's not the case. Everything is negotiable. Transactional foreign policy is going to continue. The president definitely prefers tariffs over sanctions. If you recall, toward the end of the Biden administration, sanctions were really prolific. That has been decreased a lot. For some reason, the president believes sanctions are cruel and mean, but tariffs are not. So he's the president. He can, so he definitely is going to prefer tariffs over sanctions, even for foreign policy and other things that traditionally would have been addressed with sanctions. Supply chain disruptions, bank on it. It's going to happen. So one thing I would advise is if you don't have a good trade compliance in your operations, you may consider upskilling that, because there's going to be audits, there's going to be work, there's going to be warehouse holdings that are brought in if they believe that something violates. And the way the administration is working is they are putting the burden on you. There may not be a lot of clarity on exactly what you're supposed to do, but that's your problem. And you got to fix it. And if you're wrong, you got to pay the price. So that's just the way it is. And I would like to say it's different. So really focusing on trade compliance, understanding your customers. We've been talking to some companies about how to spread risk through contracts throughout supply chains. There's ways you can do that. Try to figure out who's going to get the tariffs back. There's just all kinds of things. Personal interaction with the administration is most effective. A trade policy argument made through a letter is going to be great, but actually getting in the room and being able to talk face to face is very important. And you have to play the long game. This is not going to go away. It's been 9 months. These trends are going to continue for a long time. And so you got to be prepared for the new reality. And just on that note, I'd love for things to go back to the way they were. I liked that area. I knew it well. It was very comfortable for me, but I am 110% convinced we are never going back. It is done. And when you watch the Supreme Court case, it's possible that Congress will be called upon to act, and there may be changes to other parts of U.S. customs and trade law that will implicate our relationship. I know this seems like it's a lot. It is a lot, but again, I've given other presentations. These are challenges, but they're also opportunities. If you play your cards right, you play the long game, you get your strategy, you set your goals, you execute well over time, you can have success. But you have to play on the terms that are before you and not the ones that you wish existed. So it's a different world. There's a lot to learn, and we're still learning. So with that, I'm going to turn to Congress and politics and questions. And we'll start by putting the ball in Karen's court.
Yeah, we're going to move to a much more uplifting topic, which is the state of U.S. politics. There are lots of things we could be talking about on September 30th. But frankly, the only thing that really matters right now is the impending government shutdown. So that is going to be top of mind in all of your conversations. So that's where we'll probably start and end. But of course, happy to answer any questions. I think it's always helpful to have some historical context and to kind of do a quick recap of how we got here. Historically, even in the midst of some of the most partisan grumblings, appropriations have been the last vestige of bipartisanship in Congress. There are lots of different reasons for that, like earmarks, which everybody loves when you're able to bring federal funds back to your district or home state. But the real reason is that typically there is a group of House Republicans who never vote for appropriations bills. It doesn't matter what's in them, they don't support them. And so even when Republicans are in control in the House, they still need Democratic support in order to pass a bill because they don't have the numbers. With the trifecta that this president enjoys in terms of having control of both the White House, the House, and the Senate, winning not only the Electoral College vote, but also the popular vote, really coming into Washington with a mandate. President Trump wields incredible power politically, and is certainly pushing the limits in terms of his executive power constitutionally as well. And that means that he was able to help Speaker Johnson, who some call Magic Mike because he's able to pull votes out of nowhere. It allowed them to do something that historically has not been done. In March, they were able to pass a continuing resolution to fund the government until midnight with solely Republican votes. That then forced the Senate to come to the table, even though they hadn't negotiated on what at that point was a full year CR. Chuck Schumer, as the Senate Democratic leader, didn't want to be responsible for shutting down the government. He broke with Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries in the House and supported the continuing resolution to keep the government funded through midnight. Now, a lot of things have changed between March and today. We had a lot of oxygen taken up in the room by the reconciliation package that passed in Congress. And it's important to keep that in mind because that package was completely supported by Republicans, driven by Republicans, and Democrats didn't really have a seat at the table in any way, shape, or form. In the past, reconciliation packages have been bipartisan, but that is from a time long ago. So you have the reconciliation package, which included huge cuts to programs that a lot of members care about, both Democrats and Republicans, but particularly Democrats, including billions of dollars in Medicaid funding. You also have, at the same time as the consideration of the reconciliation package, a rescissions package that the administration requested of Congress, which Democrats tried to say, please, Republicans, let's not rescind funds that we've already appropriated as you're considering a reconciliation package that's going to make further cuts. But they got the votes. They did make some minor, I won't say minor, but billion-dollar amendments, but they were able to pass the rescissions package. Then you also have the OMB director, Russ Vought, who has been calling for appropriations to be less bipartisan, and to essentially put appropriations in the hands of the controlling party, which has been to the chagrin of some old school appropriators like Susan Collins. So we've had these factors that are kind of all contributing to increasing partisanship. And once the reconciliation package passed July 4th, the hope was you would then have the ability to turn to appropriations, get back into a bit of regular order. Because while reconciliation is going on, a lot of the appropriations were stalled. Unfortunately, that just wasn't the case. So Appropriators are not far enough along to have moved to a typical appropriations package to fund the government. They've run out of time. We now need a continuing resolution. On top of the list of kind of partisan issues I've mentioned, there was a second rescissions package, which is referred to as a pocket rescission. The president has the right, it is legal to request that Congress rescind funds that have been previously appropriated, and that provides a 45-day window. Well, there's a theory that if you request a rescission with less than 45 days left in the fiscal year, regardless of what Congress does, whether they vote down or approve that rescission, the administration has the right to hold those funds until that 45-day period ends, which means that if it ends after the fiscal year, you have effectively had a unilateral rescission. That was another step that really frustrated a lot of Democratic members. So that brings us to September, and what are we gonna do to fund the government? When we came back after Labor Day, the thought was, oh, no real plan here. We don't know how we're gonna fund the government at the end of the month. There were a lot of possibilities. There was talk of a CR that would run into March of next year, which a lot of Democrats and Republicans had concerns about because that kept us at the Biden funding level, so Republicans didn't really have a chance to make their mark. It pushed us into primary season. It's a lot harder to pass an appropriations bill in March of an even-numbered year as opposed to September of an odd-numbered year. So if we move to March of 2026, we'd probably be looking at another full-year CR. Well, surprisingly, I'm gonna be candid here. Surprisingly, Republicans actually put forward a pretty reasonable offer. A short-term CR to November 21st to give appropriators some time to come to the table and negotiate. Well, Democrats have to feed their base as well. And with the number of firings in the federal workforce, federal funding being halted and kind of tied up in courts, there's a lot of frustration in the Democratic base. Chuck Schumer has a lot of penance that he had to pay for what some would call caving in March and supporting that CR. And so Democrats put forward their own alternative. It was still a short-term CR, but it would revert the Medicaid cuts. It would revert the rescissions in terms of things like funding for public broadcasting. It would strip the president's impoundment, the Impoundments Act that gives the president the ability to request a rescission. And on top of that, there is a major cliff that will occur at the end of 2025 in terms of premium subsidies that were increased for ACA plans that were plussed up in COVID-19 that now go down about 25% at the end of the year. So especially given the kind of conviction around Obamacare, ACA, whatever you want to call it, it's the law of the land. That is really the hill I think Democrats want to die on. And that is probably the most important platform that they have in terms of not only kind of rising cost for consumers, but in particular healthcare costs. That's a non-starter for Republicans, that alternative that was put forward by Democrats. And so here we are. I think Republicans have had some missteps as well in terms of the optics here. The House was supposed to be in session this week. Speaker Johnson pulled the votes because the concept was, well, we've done our job. We passed the CR, it's now in the Senate's court, and the House doesn't need to be here. I think the optics of the House being on recess during a shutdown is not favorable. We also had kind of this back and forth between the president and Democratic leaders. For several months, Democratic leader Jeffries and Democratic leader Schumer were requesting negotiations with Republicans to talk about how we would fund the government. That never happened. And then at the last minute, the president said he would meet with Schumer and Jeffries. Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson thought that was a bad idea. I think they were concerned about the president's desire to negotiate and his affection for the art of the deal, and didn't want to be in a position where he kind of muddied the waters when they frankly have the upper hand at this point. So he canceled the meeting, which gave Democrats the ability to say, well, you're not even negotiating with us. Why should we support this bill? Well, so at the last minute, they claimed to get all of the adults in the room yesterday to have a meeting, but really that was completely performative. And frankly, I think Republicans don't have to take the offer that Democrats have given them. Leader Thune has expressed this, and it's true, having worked for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, I know. There are a lot of times that Republicans had to give up votes in order to pass a CR in the Senate that they didn't necessarily support. And this was a relatively clean and innocuous CR. If I were still on the Hill and negotiating leadership, although I am not, I would say I understand the need to throw meat at your base, the need to show that you're fighting even when all odds are stacked against you. I think that if you're going to shut down the government, it makes more sense in November and not in September. It makes more sense to say, okay, we're going to give you this vote, and we want to have a negotiation and a discussion, and ACA is one of many things that we need. AGOA expires at the end of today. Yes, thank you. Today, it is the end of the month. There are a lot of provisions that are going to be concerning for Democrats, and at the end of the day, Democratic members have been sidelined all year long. So it's an opportunity to actually have a negotiation and have some leverage. Coming ahead of the meeting with the White House, it was rumored that Leader Schumer was floating the idea of a very short term, I think like a 2-week CR to avoid a shutdown. So the optics are, there's concern that Senate Democrats are going to cave. If you talk to most House Democrats, they will say the same. They are concerned that they think Schumer is going to cave. But at the same time, it's unclear what either side gets out of a shutdown. It's at the end of the day, if you're a Republican, you have complete power in Washington. Why can't you fund the government? If you're a Democrat, why couldn't you support a clean CR to get us to November? There is no clear exit strategy for this shutdown. I think the hope is that something that one of our colleagues, former Speaker Boehner, used to say when he was in leadership is sometimes you have to let them touch the stove. You think that this is what you want, I'm gonna let you touch the stove so that you can get burned. And so perhaps both sides will be burned by this experience, and they'll come to the table and have a negotiation that allows us to reopen the government and hopefully fund it for a full year to get us into September of next year, when we will probably see another CR, since we will, of course, be a couple of months ahead of the midterm elections. So that is where things stand, and the tea leaves, as best I can read them, for funding the government.
Yeah, I think I read this morning that some of the people that monitor this and try to figure out the implications for the economy, 80% was the probability of a shutdown, so it's pretty high. Pretty high, and I think this one's different. We've had shutdowns before that have been, it gives the executive branch a lot of power, and so we'll see how this plays out, but it could be pretty impactful this time. I think this one's different. Yeah,
and I think in March, the argument that Schumer made was it gives the administration a lot of power, and they're already trying to gut the federal workforce, so why would we give them complete authority to do that? I think now, even in talking to some of the most, level-headed members, last week was the Congressional Black Caucus week, so I had the joy of engaging with some of my old bosses. The thought was, they're gutting the workforce regardless, and so this is our opportunity to express our opposition and show our base that we are fighting back and resisting.
And I want to turn to Q&A quickly, but I hope that the secretary doesn't mind if I ask for his thoughts. We've got a very experienced and savvy political and substance policy person. So, Mr. Secretary, if you don't mind, what are your thoughts on the shutdown and the current political dynamics? And if you do mind, my apologies, you can call me out later.
Right. Well, first of all, I think that the two of you have done a wonderful job. And listening to you, I was actually saying, okay, I can go with that. Then I was saying I can go with that. I'll tell you, I think the president did not make the mistake this time that he made last time, where he said, I'll take credit for the shutdown, right? And so that really puts that sort of maintains the power leverage that he has and that Republicans have in controlling both houses of Congress as well. I don't know, I think the issue is what the Senate does, the Democrats in the Senate, really, at the end of the day. Because whatever they do, then the House Democrats will follow, and that's the result. I do think, I understood Schumer's position last time when he said, look, there is this threat, right, of gutting the federal government, and when you have a shutdown, that puts immense power in the hands of the executive branch. But he still took a lot of heat for that. I mean, a lot of heat. And he was almost standing alone in that instance in doing it. Whether he'll take the tack of doing that again is a real consideration. He could argue that he's being statesmanlike for doing that and saying that I'm strong enough to take that heat to minimize the pain on the American people. Right? He could take that posture. And he could also, frankly, take the posture that I tried it this way last time. Everybody knows that I'm willing to sort of put all my cards on the table and take the heat, but no one is willing to stand with me. And so we're just gonna take a little short-term pain that everyone has to endure and see where we end up and try to negotiate our way through that, over the next couple of weeks. And that could be the position that he takes. this analogy of letting everybody kind of touch the stove, that may be the thing that really happens here. And so you have a shutdown, everybody experiences the pain, and then you have to kind of work together to come out of that. That may be just the thing that puts everybody on the same page. Right? Some to a lesser extent, because I think you probably have some in the administration who would be okay with that, because they then get a chance to take some extra, flesh. But they're already doing that, right? And they've already gained from doing that. So I don't know that they gain that much more having another opportunity to do so. I'm hopeful that they figure out a way to keep it open and use that as an occasion to come to the table, recognizing that they need to negotiate their way through this. And, but that's my hope. I also think that this internal fighting, it really exposes us in ways that I don't think we fully appreciate. Because you're not doing the business of government, you're doing politics, right? So this is where, that's where Karen is, the politics, Everett is the business of government. You can have disagreements about the business of government, but at least you're doing government. You're trying to figure out a path where you and your constituents and hopefully the nation as a whole benefits. But when it's politics, you're really not doing the business of government. You're doing politics. And I just think that leaves you exposed. And I think it also, it leaves your friends wondering whether you're really serious. Right? It leaves your friends wondering whether you're really, really serious. And I just think that in that sense, you lose. I don't think you win in that sense. And so that's really my concern, that with all of this gamesmanship, you lose. And then I want to make this last point. At the core of our system is the need for collaboration, the need for dialogue, the need for give and take. That's at the core of our system. That's what the separation of powers, that's what that's all about. It was a gamble made 250 years ago, roughly. And it was a gamble that suggested that if you put real power in the hands of reasonable people, they can work through it. That's the gamble. And I think that if we're unwilling to really bet on that, then we suggest to our friends who've been willing to follow our lead in that regard that maybe they should evaluate their own system, their own relationships. I mean, and I do think that you've got a player like China that just really, and rightly so, sees itself as the real winner in all of this. So those are my thoughts. I know it's been a little circular, but I wanted to give, at least from my perspective, consideration to what I thought were just excellent arguments made by my colleagues.
Well, thank you. We do try to be nonpartisan, but I certainly appreciate those comments. And just to pull back, the next few months are going to be very dynamic. The shutdown is likely. If you're here in Washington tomorrow, you're going to have pretty open streets, so I guess you'll be able to get around better. Maybe that's good news, I don't know. But I think for the economy, it's got a warning sign. So over the next 3 months, we're gonna watch the economic indicators. A lot of the tariffs are going to really start kicking in. There'll be some new 232 tariffs. The Supreme Court will rule on a number of executive power plays, including the IEEPA tariffs. And so it's going to be a very, very interesting third and fourth quarter for a lot of these trends. I think Karen will probably agree that a lot of this was probably, while Congress right now is not very engaged, I do think a lot of this is going to end up in Congress someday. There's just too much going on. So that's something that we'll be watching very carefully. So let me turn it over to Alex, and if you want to lead questions and answers, or if you want to kick it off, we'd love to help.
First of all, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Excellent presentation. I have 2 questions. Is transition agreements?
Yeah.
That's a concept that I heard for the first time this morning. How do they work? And
So-
how can they benefit?
Sure. So I think that this is a good point, and one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about is the old trade policy versus new trade policy. The old trade policy negotiating tactic was nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. So no deal until everything's agreed. Boy, that was sacrosanct. That's not the case anymore. Now, everything's agreed till, well, I'll tell you later. So these framework agreements set the table for further negotiations. These negotiations are ongoing. I suspect that the UK agreement, for example, that was the first one negotiated, is going to be negotiated for 4 years. USMCA is going to be under constant negotiation. If you go back to this slide, well, I didn't have this in there, but these negotiations are endless. They never stop. So you're either negotiating or you're reacting. And so that's why I think playing the long game is, so they're calling them framework agreements. They actually put these in the executive orders in the implementation of some of these agreements. They have created a number of products that are exempt from reciprocal tariffs if you get a framework agreement. This is something you should look at as well. So yeah, it's a new concept. It's one that's going to be around for a while.
And would you locate those in UCR?
Yeah, there's 3 bodies. There's USTR, well, there's 4. Well, USTR on reciprocal, Commerce on 232, obviously agriculture and Treasury and state are all having impacts as well. And then, of course, the president, who's the ultimate decider, which is another major trend, is that traditionally when you would talk to a cabinet official or a representative, they would give you an answer and say, okay, I can deliver that. And that was the idea behind trade negotiating authorities. You knew the person you're negotiating with had the authority to close the deal. The only person that's going to close the deal is the president. So the fact that you've got to be engaged at the highest levels to be successful. Do you agree?
I do.
Yeah.
Having watched your work.
Yes.
Well, first of all, we want to thank you, Alex, and the entire team for hosting us. As you mentioned, this space is not only a tradition, it's certainly one of the events of the Dominican Week that more insight and value add toward the relation. I want to connect your experience with the report that was launched yesterday for the Atlantic Council, where they identified 6 areas or strategic pillars where they said that the Dominican Republic needs to focus in order to close and develop their relationship with the United States. Taking into consideration that everything is negotiable, I don't know if you are familiar with this report. Of the 6 areas that they identified that are related with logistics, security, digital infrastructure, the bilateral relationships in terms of institutionals, energy, mining, which of those areas do you consider that will be prioritized or be the main areas that the Dominican Republic need to focus, considering everything that is happening in the United States?
Well, this is a great question because it illustrates opportunity, and I'm familiar with the report, and I was part of the working group, particularly in the last cycle. Though I've been working with Alex and obviously Jason and the team. They do really great work, and I think that I would do all of them. I think they identified the right priorities, and if you look at the America First mindset, every one of those has a connectivity. And what I would like to do if I were just to, I would literally get a whiteboard out and say, this is what you need to do, because you can connect all those to a framework agreement potentially and come out ahead. It may not be the way we thought it was going to be, but there's ways to drive that agenda forward with this administration. And so that is the opportunity for the DR, the Dominican Republic, to solidify its geographic, economic, business advantages in a very, very fraught environment. But it doesn't happen without thoughtful execution. So I do think that those are very good priorities and good pillars. Obviously, one of the prioritization is, well, what's going to work for you? I don't know the energy makeup right now, but maybe that's one area. There may be others that are not identified, including non-traditional energy, AI, things like that. But I think those are good pillars. I think the report's valuable, and I think it's time well spent. I know you had a program yesterday. I wish I could have gone. What are your thoughts, Karen?
Yeah, just in quickly reviewing those 6 pillars, as I was not as involved in the report as Everett. I would probably prioritize those related to national security, and they are all tied in some way. But there's a reference to kind of homeland and regional security, and then also the energy security. I feel like those are not only clear priorities of this administration, but I think there is political cover on both sides in terms of engaging in that way.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'd also like to thank Alejandro, for hosting us, and it's a fantastic event. Thank you so much for that. Not to mention the economic cost of the government shutdown, which was last one, I think it was 2018. Cost about $3 billion, I'm not sure. How would this stall the negotiations of the trade agreement? The ongoing negotiation on tariffs with the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
Who are the speakers now?
It's a good point. There was an article this morning that said 40% of USTR's workforce will be idled. So we're worried about it. I mean, we have work we're doing on Capitol Hill on behalf of clients that we may not be able to do. Meanwhile, the administration can continue to impose tariffs. They're going to keep Customs is going to keep working. Customs and Border Patrol, Homeland Security. So I think from a if you're not in government, I think it puts you at a very significant disadvantage to engage. So yeah, it's a problem. I don't know. I don't have an answer for it. It's really going to be a problem. But that just means there'll be more to catch up on when it comes back open. But obviously, the senior political officials will still be around. Will they actually be accepting meetings and things like that? We'll have to see. Karen?
So it was about $3 billion in a permanent loss for the 2018 shutdown. I think that initially the expectation is that this administration will make this shutdown as painful as possible, which is interesting because it's the exact opposite position as to the 2018 shutdown, which was deeming as many staff as possible essential so that it kind of limited the impact of the shutdown, which Trump claimed as his own responsibility. So I do think that the staff will be shuttered early on. But I think that if this ends up being a longer term shutdown, you'll see what happened in 2013, which is kind of more and more employees being deemed essential and coming back to work to try to help keep things operating and functioning as smoothly as you might expect in the middle of a shutdown. So I think the length of time
Follow-up
depends.
question. What happens if you get one of these goods or you export from the Dominican Republic into the United States under the 10% now tariff, and then it gets negotiated to 0? Do you get the tax credit? Is it retroactive, that tax credit?
It depends. It depends. Some of it, I mean, some of these are making, I doubt the 10% is going to be removed and made retroactive, but on some of the 232s, they are making them retroactive. So my counsel would be to identify the sectors that are most important and try to get, at least test the waters as to a framework agreement and with the U.S. government to build upon the current trade agreement we have. That's what I would do. Yes, David?
Hi, Everett. Thank you so much for our usual annual catch-up. The soft underbelly for the Dominican economy is clearly the relationship with Haiti. And today also expires a minor item for the large world, but not for the Dominican Republic and Haiti, but the Hope Health Preferences, which really made the co-production free trade zone function, and that's been a successful story. Any sense on, and your ideas on, what should be the strategic positioning vis-a-vis something like that, as opposed to the long-term flight of a zero tariff, 10 to something else, that kind of thing, because large players adjust 3, 6, 9 months, eventually get your money back, but a small player like this can really be a killer hit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's, also AGOA in many countries in Africa that are very dependent upon that for their economy. This expires today. In contravention of what I just said, it could be I do think there's hope for for Haiti, for the Haiti bill, and for AGOA. There's a lot of bipartisan support, and the administration has been showing willingness to see those programs reauthorized. The problem is the shutdown, and when are you going to get it done? But I think a short-term extension is very possible with retroactive application, actually, on this part of the program, unless it goes for too long. Like the GSP program has been out for 5 years or something. They're not going to refund that money. It's too much. So I think there's a good shot at getting that money refunded. And I also think that there's a good shot at getting those programs extended for a long period, but it's not going to happen in the next few weeks.
No, yeah, I would agree. If we were looking at a short-term CR, we would be looking at an extension of AGOA and Haiti's trade preference. So hopefully, if it's a short-term shutdown, you have some retroactivity, and there's hope to include it on a full-year CR.
Yes, sir.
Do you see any scenario where your CAFTA survives? And the reason I ask is because, what we're trying to push USDR right now is getting the same treatment that Mexico, where the product complies, it gets zero. I mean,
Well,
everything we've talked today,
yeah,
it seems to me that the CAFTA
it's complicated. I think that in order to do that, you need to recall that the USMCA was a renegotiated agreement, and CAFTA-DR has not been renegotiated. So I think what the administration would want to see is some of the provisions of the USMCA replicated in CAFTA-DR. And with that kind of an outcome, I can absolutely see it continuing.
So we'll have to wait till late next year for the renegotiation of USMCA.
I think that's probably right, but I would not wait intellectually. I think I would do the work and thinking about it now, and even looking at, rules, laws, regulations, what might it take to bring the agreements in parity, and get ahead of that, and prepare for that, because if you do that, you obviously are gonna be able to move faster. So, this is a gamble, and you're gambling that, that the trends that we were seeing are going to continue, and that the administration is gonna ask for, modifications to trade agreements. I can't tell you 100% they're gonna do that, but I'm pretty confident. It's what I would do, right? So I think, but again, there's also countries in the CAFTA-DR who probably weren't in the same situation, right? Like you look at Nicaragua. And so there's a chance to retain what you have and separate yourself and even gain an advantage in this environment, I think.
I would just, excuse me, I would just say, just because the government might be shutting down and things look uncertain, that doesn't mean that your work stops. There's opportunity in using the strategic alliances, build, whatever research is necessary, to kind of lay the groundwork. A lot of times the best policy is enacted, the best deals are negotiated because of that groundwork that's been laid well before the opportunity presented itself.
I think I don't know what your next meeting is. We can do a couple more questions, but I don't want to overstay. I don't want to be intrude on.
The minister raised his hand.
Oh, the minister raised his hand. Well, we have all the time in the world.
So it's him.
Usted primero. Thank you. You said that you were 102% certain that this is not going back.
Yeah.
And the US has had a pretty successful history in terms of alternate ways of government, in terms of political parties. Next year, 3 years down the road, you don't see this landscape changing, even if there is a change of control of Congress and or the executive branch?
Yeah, let me differentiate between political and economic trends and governance, because yes, it will change. How they're implemented will be different. And if you remember last year, I think we talked about many of the objectives that the president's seeking were actually pursued by President Biden. He used different tools, but you look at Intel and reshoring and investment and the investment credits and nearshoring. I mean, a lot of those trends in blending national security with economic security, those are happening. So when I say we're not going back, we're not going back to the just-in-time, efficiency-driven, interdependent, global system with the WTO at the center. We're not going back to that. We're going to have a more fragmented global environment with probably commoditized trade at its base, with technology transfers between like-minded partners. That's what I think. But they're headed that way anyway. This is just how it's being effectuated. So I think if the Democrats take the House or the Senate or the presidency, a lot of these trends are going to continue, but they'll be articulated and advanced in a different way.
Right, different priorities. So right now we're talking about national security and energy dominance. We might be talking about sustainability and human rights.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Assuming that the CAFTA doesn't survive, is there any possibility, any room for negotiation of that 10% tariff that we have right now?
Yeah.
And in case we do, what would be our main leverage for negotiation?
Well, I think your leverage is that you have a very good relationship with the United States and understanding that. I think that I think the U.S. government will engage with any economy that wants to do a framework agreement.
So it would be a framework agreement.
Yeah, that's what I would do. I mean, I think I would do that. And what I believe will happen is when the IEEPA tariffs fall, probably, that Congress will come in and retroactively endorse a lot of these framework agreements. Yes, sir. Mr. Minister, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the invitation. I have a serious problem in understanding the policies that underpin the way that at least the Trump administration is expressing the reasons for the tariffs, particularly recently the trade agreements, countries that have trade agreements with the U.S. Yes, the RCAP has not been renegotiated. However, the main reasons, at least that were explicit at the time for the tariffs, were trade deficits. Those countries that either tariffs or non-tariff tariffs had led to an unjust trade with the U.S. and the U.S. Had a deficit with those countries. Then there were other reasons, China, negotiations with China, or we're not part of drug trafficking, and so on, a number of reasons. Well, the Dominican Republic, from 2015 to 2024, had a trade balance of $152 billion with the U.S., of which $42 billion was surplus pork in favor of the U.S. So no trade, in terms of China, the Dominican Republic, unlike other Caribbean or Central American countries, and the Chinese elsewhere. Interesting. There are no investments in infrastructure at all. Look at recent openings of ports in Peru, Shanghai, Chinese loan, or the space station in Argentina, Chinese loan. There are no civil structures whatsoever in the Dominican Republic. In terms of earth effect, in the 5 years of current administration, we have tripled the number of drugs seized in comparison to the previous 16 years. So I can point to countries, names, countries similar to ours in our region, where the president has visited China, ours hasn't, that have Chinese loans, don't, as I've said, that where the Chinese played, according to press reports, an important role in the re-election of that president. That's not our case. And yet, those get invited to the White House. And we don't. It's a movable target. Well, I have to comply with these, but well, here is this other reason, and so on. So which leads me to wonder, and we know this security situation that is ongoing with our neighbor, Haiti, with which we've been collaborating closely with the U.S. and trying to find a workable solution to bring security back into Haiti. But then, help, which would be essential, so the U.S. is helping to bring some sense, certain security, and spending a bit of money on it. But on the other hand, maybe the rules of the hotel textile preferences are not necessarily, but so thousands of jobs will be lost in Haiti. Help me to understand how we, the Dominican Republic, can negotiate and with whom. Because, as you said, everything seems to go up to the top to President Trump. But that's for the large countries. That's for, as you pointed out, the UK, European Union, Japan, and so on. And I don't mean to imply that Secretary Rubio has not been a listener. We have met with him a number of times. Quite, the dialogue has been very fruitful and so on. But we still have a 10% tariff on our goods in comparison to Mexico, doesn't. And we have a lot of products that compete with Mexicans, and we're at a disadvantage, as has been pointed out. So, please help me.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's reconvene a year from now. No, I think you made very, very elegant points, and you know, some of you articulated a broad-based strategy where all the pieces fit together into a coherent narrative, right? I would love to say that's how things work, but it's not. And it's much more ad hoc, and even internally within the U.S. government right now, there's not a lot of people, so it's a very small group making decisions with imperfect information. And regardless, we still have to navigate in that environment. So I can't explain the dichotomy, the perception of one country vis-a-vis another. I just would, again, point to some of the elements of the current relationship that I think can be built on. And remember that we're 9 months into the administration and that this is a long game, and they're going to be around for a long time. So I do think it's something to continue to focus on and try to exploit those advantages. Karen?
I was like,
No, she's got the answer.
No. Very articulate points, well reasoned, but I think applying reason to a process that may be unreasonable. And it reminds me of the very beginning of the Trump administration, before Elon Musk was outed, this kind of concept of, the Silicon Valley, move fast and break things. I think that regardless of the machinations, this president is very clear that he is focused on America first and bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. by any means necessary, and energy dominance. And this is his effort to do that. And so I would always keep that kind of guiding light in mind. And with regards to the invitations of some and not others, I would always appeal to. I would defer to my Republican colleagues and those with the experience, but I would always appeal to the opportunity to respectfully tap into the president's vanity and this kind of insatiable desire for a deal and the opportunity to kind of stand in front of cameras and say, look what I did. So find a way to help him win.
Yeah, and there are ideas, but I'm not going to bring them to. We can talk about them. But there are things that the president's very interested in. He's very interested in being recognized for his efforts on peace. He's very interested in deals on investment in rare earths and these big optical, deliverables. So a lot of it is maybe not necessarily redoing everything, you don't need to, but finding just a couple of symbolic maximum impact events that really resonate. That's how I think it's an important thing to consider. But let me thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here. It's an honor to have you here. And we know you're very busy, Ambassador. Thank you for being here. And all of you who are running businesses and governing and doing all the important work that you do. We're glad you took the time to be with us today. Hope you found it worthwhile. We'll look forward to seeing you again and for continued conversations. So enjoy the rest of your semana, and thank you so much for being here.